How do you do? My name is John Muir. I was born on April the 21st, 1838 in Dunbar, Scotland. I was one of 8 children born to my parents. That's who it was. You're right. No, it's Daniel and Anne Muir. My father was a grain merchant. We lived in the floors above his store. My mother tells me that my father was a very happy man when he was married. He used to sing and dance. He even carved his own violin. That's not the man I knew. My father had become a religious fanatic. He allowed no music in the house other than the book of Psalms from the Bible, no book in the house other than the Bible, no paintings or pictures in the house, that would be idolatry, and he was cruel. He believed that his task as a father was to beat the devil out of each of his children. And every time we did something wrong, we were beaten and forced to memorize scripture. By the time I was 11 years old, I'd memorized the entire New Testament. It wasn't any better at school. Schoolmasters caned us. It was a cruel life. But respite I had from this was my grandfather, my maternal grandfather, would take me out into the woods, and there it was peaceful. No demands on me. I loved it. Well, when I was 11 years old, my father announced to the family that we were moving to America. He was going to get away from the devil that lived in Dunbar and take us to the new land where he would be free. We children were excited about it. We jumped up and down and cheered. My mother wept because this would mean she would have to say goodbye to all her family, all of her loved ones, and go halfway around the world with a madman and 8 children. On board the ship, my father got seasick, so we children were free to roam. My brothers and I, we were close to the sailors, and we made the mistake of using some of the words we had learned that the sailors used around my father. My father learned that he did not leave the devil back in Dunbar. The devil had come with him and his own kids. Arrived in America, we went to Wisconsin, where we homesteaded. We cut down the trees. We built our own cabin. And I said to my father, I want to go back to school. My father said, nonsense. You've had 3 years of education. That's enough for anybody. You're going to work on the farm. You've got to work. And he was as cruel as ever. But there, I just had to step out the door and walk a little ways, and I would be in the woods. And I found the calm and the peace and the harmony there. And also this creative power of the universe. This God was so unlike the God of my father. This God was present to me and revealed things to me. God told me things to invent, how to do them. I made a thermometer and a barometer completely out of wood, because the wood would shrink and expand and I could measure it. And also, I had never seen inside a clock before, but I knew how it had to work. So I made a wooden clock completely out of wooden gears, and it worked. And the neighbor said, patent it. You'll make money on these inventions. Patent it? I said, no. These came from God. I can't charge for these. Anybody who can use them is free to use them. Well, when I was 22 years old, I'd had it with my father. And I struck out on my own. And I began by going to the state fair. And I took along my inventions, and I was the hit of the fair. The newspaper, Madison newspaper, had an article that said, backwoodsman is genius at making things of wood. They were intrigued by it. The one thing I did that was the most popular, by the way, was the alarm bed. Now, it's really cold in Wisconsin, and there's no fire in the house at night. So in the morning, when the alarm goes off, the bed I invented would just simply rise slowly up until it was perpendicular to the floor, and you got out of bed whether you wanted to or not. A very effective alarm. The thing, though, that there was a Dr. Carr. He was a professor of chemistry at the University of Madison, and he was there, and he looked at what I had invented. I had invented a little thing to measure the growth of a plant, and I used human hairs in wood. He said he had never seen anything like it in his life. I want you to come and study with me at the university. I said, I've only been to 3 years of school. I'll get you in. And he did. And I went to the University of Wisconsin. And it was exciting, thrilling. I could take classes. I was studying, I was learning. But the Civil War broke out. And there were gangs of people were coming around and getting young men to go into the Union Army, conscripted, no choice. And I knew that I could not do that. I could not participate in a war and kill other human beings. I saw it in nature. It never happens in nature. There's never wanton killing of others. There's harmony. And I could not do that. And so I told Dr. Carr, I'm going to go to Canada. He said, wait. If you enroll in the medical school here, you can go into the army and not have to carry a gun, because if you're enrolled in medical school, they'll put you in the medical corps automatically. Would you do that? And I said, yes, but it's got to be done right away. So we agreed a 2-week period. If he could get me into the medical school in 2 weeks, I would go. I fled to Canada. The day I left, the letter came. I didn't know about it for weeks, but the letter said, you are admitted to the medical school at the University of Wisconsin, all expenses paid. I went to Canada. I got a job in a broom handle factory, and I took over their production. I increased their production 3-fold. I became in demand. After the war, I came back to the U.S. and I went to Indianapolis, and I was in charge of a wagon wheel factory, and I increased their productions. I was on my way to being a millionaire. People really wanted me and needed. And then one day I was working at a grinder with some metal, and the piece of metal flew off and went in my right eye. It was blinded. And my other eye, they said, out of sympathy, went blind also. It was dark. Where did I go wrong? All that peace I found in the woods, I may never see again. But it was so fulfilling. And I've gotten tied up in the way of human beings and their machines, and I've lost. If my sight comes back, I'm going to find my way, and I'm going to be a tramp on this earth and not settle down until I find out why I'm here and who I am and what I'm to do with my life. The sight came back. The doctor said it was a miracle. So I set off. I tramped. My plan was to walk from Indianapolis down to Savannah, Georgia, get a boat in Savannah and go to the Amazon and experience it there, experience nature and get guidance from God. So, now that was not a very wise thing to do. Right after the Civil War, for a Yankee alone to walk through the South was not at all. I was chased, beaten, but I found out a way to be safe. I lived in cemeteries on the way. I stayed in the cemetery because I'm not afraid of death. I'm used to it in nature. Nothing to be afraid of. Other people wouldn't go in the cemetery at night, so I was safe. But I picked up some lung disease that would plague me all of my life. I got to Savannah. I was not healthy enough to go to the Amazon. So I would go to California, a better climate, and I wanted to see Yosemite. I'd heard about it. So I took a ship to San Francisco, and I walked from San Francisco up to Yosemite. And I was only going to stay there 2 months, but I fell in love with it. I built my own cabin right over a stream near the foot of Yosemite Falls. And I built a lumber mill. There was none in the mountains then. And so I built one. We only used the trees that had already been felled by nature, and we would cut them up and make boards available for people constructing buildings. The Transcontinental Railroad had just gone in, and people from the east were flocking to California. They wanted to see Yosemite, one of the things, so crowds came to Yosemite. They were just, in 1 week's time, we had 20 people visit Yosemite Park. Over almost 3 people a day. And they had no tour guide. I became the tour guide. I would be the guide and so I had to learn everything I could about the Sierra Nevada mountains. I read every book possible on it. I went out and I climbed every mountain peak in that range. And to get to the top of the mountain, there's a tradition that there's a log that you're supposed to sign your name in at the top of the mountain. I wouldn't do that. I'm not doing it for recognition. I'm doing it to experience it. I want to experience the mountains. And there in the Sierra, every mountain is Christ's Sermon on the Mount, if you have the ears to hear it and the eyes to see it. And every evening when the alpenglow, the red sky becomes red, it is so filled with peace. It is Christ saying, my peace I leave with you. and all the mountains are bowing, and I bow. And I'm so filled with joy inside of creation that I dance. I knew who I was now. I am a child of God, and I live in this earth, on this earth, a part of this earth. And I'm brothers and sisters with all the other creatures and all the other elements around. I belong, and my goal in life is to be in harmony with that spirit and that flow that underlies all of life. Well, I just loved everything I could. I did all the research I could to improve being a guide, and saw some lichen that I'd never seen before. So I sketched very careful sketches of the lichen, and I even counted the number of lichen in a square inch, in case you like, 550 in a square inch. And I submitted it to Scientific Journal. They ignored it. I wrote articles about it because the textbooks all said that Yosemite Valley, all the valleys of Yosemite were formed by earthquake. I knew that wasn't so. You could look at the walls, and I could see the markings of glacier. This is glacier. So when I took my people on tours, I told them, here are the signs. It's glacier that formed this. The books are all wrong. Somebody took that word back to the author of one of the books. You know, LeConte, famous Joseph LeConte at University of California, Berkeley. So he came up, and he wanted to know what I was saying. And so I took it and I showed him. And he said, John, you're right. And he went back and he contacted Eli Whitney, who was the head geologist for the state of California, and they issued a statement. And the statement read that John Muir, one of America's outstanding naturalists, has revealed to us that we were incorrect in assuming it was earthquake. It is a glacier. He is correct. When that was printed, they wanted all the manuscripts I could send them. They would print anything I would write to them. I was being acclaimed as a naturalist. And people wanted to talk to me. They wanted my things that I wrote. And universities and others gave me, I got honorary doctorates from Harvard and Yale and University of Wisconsin, University of California at Berkeley. And my articles were appearing everywhere. I traveled around the world twice. They wanted me in each of the areas, like the Amazon. I went to the Amazon. I went to Alaska and tried to help them to save and preserve the glaciers. So I'd go around the world speaking and talk. It was a joyous time. And people came from around the world now to see John Muir. And they visited me. Ralph Waldo Emerson came. And he offered me a position as a professor at Harvard University. And I laughed at him. I said, I've only been in 3 years of school. He said, we want you. And I said, no, I wouldn't leave this to teach in a classroom. And Charles Sargent, who was the head of Arboretum at Harvard, he is the outstanding person in the world in terms of forests. He came, we would become lifelong friends. When I took him out in the evening, and we stood there, and the alpenglow was there, and I started to dance, and I said, show some emotion. He stood there. And I said, come on, show some emotion. He said, I don't wear my emotions on my sleeve. And I said, hoot, man, I don't care where. I know, he said, I don't wear my heart on my sleeve. And I said, hoot, man, I don't care where you carry your little heart. Don't just stand in front of the universe and God and say, show me, I'm from Boston. It wasn't like that when Teddy Roosevelt came. The President of the United States came, wanted to backpack with me for 4 days. Nobody else there, the two of us. He said, teach me everything you can about Yosemite. And the evening, when the alpenglow began to shine, and I started to dance, Teddy Roosevelt danced with me. And he shouted, bully, bully! And the next morning, we woke up and there was snow all over our sleeping bags. And he said, this is the bulliest week of my life. And I showed him what the cattle grazing and the sheep grazing were doing. I showed him what the railroads were doing, clearing trees to make way for railroad to come into Yosemite Valley. I showed him the strip mining. I showed him the lumbering that was going on, cutting down they dynamited them, the huge redwood trees. Destroy half of them, but you could the other half and make money off of it. And I said, we've got to preserve this for the future, And he did something about it. Teddy Roosevelt went back to Washington. There had only been one national park, and it was Yellowstone. And Teddy Roosevelt declared that Yosemite would be a national park. And he named 5 other national parks. He made 18 monuments that you could not develop the land and so forth. And he set aside 235 million acres of public lands as national forests that could not have grazing and so forth in them. And he would be called the father of our national parks. But he said, no, John Muir is why we have national parks like this. I formed the Sierra Club, whose purpose was to save the wilderness for the future generations. And I would be its president for the first 22 years. And in there I wrote articles. And I spoke around the country and called people, come to the wilderness. Find out who you are. If you're there in the cities all wrapped up in you have to come. It's like your soul, your body, like a camera. In a camera, there's a tin plate at the back. When the camera's open, what's out there makes an image upon the camera. And so when you go into the wilderness, you open your life, and the very image of the eternal is placed upon your soul. And you know who you are. You're in touch with your roots. You will not learn that by anything that I write, or anybody writes, or any picture you see, any more than if you're freezing cold, you will get warm by looking at a picture of a fire. You've got to go into the wilderness, be baptized in the wilderness, experience it. Experience the power of God in the world and in your life. So that was my message. There was a family in the Sierra Club, the Strentz family, who were very active conservationists. They had a daughter, Wanda Louise. We married. And I was a little over 40 years old, and I wouldn't be a tramp anymore. Now, when we had 2 daughters, we moved into the family home in Martinez. They had a large farm there, and I began to take over the running of the farm, and I was able to do it effectively. And then Wanda Louise, when I got back from a trip, she informed me she had sold the farm, kept just the house and the immediate acres around it, because it was taking too much of my spirit and my time, and I needed to be out there preaching to the world and saving the forests and nature for the world. What a woman. She released me and I went back out speaking. When I was 65, Wanda died, and the light went out of my life. I decided I'll just settle in the farmhouse and stay in harmony with God and creation for the rest of my days. But 2 things happened that would change that. The first was William Kent, the congressman from Marin in the U.S. Congress, was able to get some land, over 500 acres of natural land with redwoods in it that had been planned to be developed. It was all going to be destroyed. And he got the land and bought out from under them, and he gave it to the government as a national monument. And the Interior Department said, this shall be Kent Woods. And he said, no, I'll give it to you that you will name it Muir Woods. And then he said, I've never met John Muir, but I read his books. And I realized, as long as I have life, I've got to keep writing. I've got to keep communicating. I have no right to just be quiet now. And then the second thing that happened was that, well, in the city of San Francisco, when there's the earthquake, most of the damage in San Francisco was due to fire because they didn't have the water to put the fire out. So it needed a huge reservoir for water for San Francisco. And they wanted to build it up in the Sierra, and they chose it would either be Hetchetki Valley or Yosemite Valley. Those are the places they wanted because they were natural basins, and just put a dam up would be very simple. And I fought that with my whole being. They had me back to Washington to testify against doing it. I pointed out to them that you're destroying, and then it was decided it would be Hetchetki. One of the most beautiful, Hetchetki and Yosemite are 2 of the most beautiful valleys in the entire world. And you're going to destroy one of them, just to provide the water. When there are other places, you could build that reservoir in numerous places in the Sierra. It would cost you more money, but it would save these beautiful things. So I spoke in front of Congress. Well, the coalition that was in favor of this really set out to attack me. They published and printed things like that John Muir claims to be this great naturalist. He's never got an earned degree in his life. He doesn't like us cutting down the trees to level them out, to put this reservoir there, all these beautiful trees. It was all right for him. He had his own sawmill. He cut trees. He claims to be this inventor who's invented all these things. Go to the patent office. There's not one patent in his name. He's claimed to be climbed all the mountains in the Sierra, know those mountains intimately. Look in the logs at the top of the mountains. His name is not in a one. This man is a fraud. He's telling you stories that aren't true. And Congress believed him. And they approved. And they destroyed Hetchy Valley to make way for a reservoir. They began leveling the trees. 1914. That would be the year, it would be my last year on this earth. It broke my heart to see that. It was at Christmas time that year, and I was down visiting my daughter. And I had that lung disease, and it had bothered me all my life. It became so heavy on me, and I knew it was close to the end. On Christmas Eve, they took me to the hospital. And I was able to kid and laugh with the nurses and the doctors. I knew death was coming, but I'm not afraid. Because in God's creation, you see it. It's a part of all creation. They found me early one morning, sitting up in the bed, and I had the papers I had laid around. I was still writing on the Alaska glaciers. And in my lap, there was a notebook, and I had written the words, "Death is a gracious mother who comes to take her children home."